Evening all. Hello and welcome back to the channel. In this video we're going to go through an update with the interstellar object known as 3I Atlas, as well as the suspicious shutdown of NASA and why SETI have changed the rules of engagement when it comes to communicating with ETs. We also speak to author Andrew Collins on his take on what the 3I Atlas could be. Stay tuned for that, that's quite a fascinating angle. And just in a quick roundup for those that are new to this, 3I Atlas is the third known interstellar object to enter our solar system, after Oumuamua and Borisov. This one was discovered on the 1st of July and was picked up by the Asteroid Terrestrial Alert System, ATLAS. Speculation quickly circulated on the internet due to its weird chemical makeup, its anti-tail, and its hyperbolic trajectory, which is basically leaving our solar system not to return. And Professor Avi Loeb added fuel to the fire by speculating, not saying it was, but speculating that it could be alien technology, or at least artificial in nature, which equates to the same thing. 3I Atlas is currently in the Virgo constellation, and it's around 128 million miles away from the Sun, which means it's around 220 million miles away from Earth. Since we last reported, it was doing roughly 137,000 miles per hour as it approached Mars, and then it went off radar. Reports from the Minor Planet Center and NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory just released new data on the interstellar object following its perihelion passage on the 29th of October 2025. The new data covers a period between the 31st of October and the 4th of November. When compared to previous data obtained between the 5th and the 8th of October, it seems that 3I Atlas brightened by approximately 5 times in the green band. And then there's a non-gravitational acceleration anomaly. Non-gravitational acceleration means an object in space is changing speed or direction in ways gravity just can't explain. Normally comets and asteroids move because of the sun's gravity pulling them or gravity of planets nudging them. But sometimes they speed up, slow down or veer off course without any nearby gravitational cause. That's when scientists suspect something else is pushing, such as gas jets from melting ice, which is not unusual in common comets, or solar radiation pressure like sunlight acting as sails, or something more exotic like an internal propulsion or energy release. 3I Atlas is showing signs that it might be experiencing non-gravitational acceleration, and here's why that's unusual. Firstly, it's very massive. It's about 10 kilometers in radius, which is about 6.2 miles. So small gas jets wouldn't really move such a big object, and remember, it's very heavy. It's moving faster after the perihelion than gravity would generally predict. It's emitting a lot of light, possibly from its core, not just reflected sunlight. Professor Loeb suggests it might be powered by an antimatter annihilation, which would release huge energy and cause acceleration. This would also shrink the comet over some time, which is something that at least can be measured, and that's the other problem. For this process to happen, there really should be signs of a tail, and there isn't. So in short, 3I Atlas is not behaving like a normal comet, and its motion hints at an internal energy source or unknown physics. But until we have more data, we just can't tell. But this video is not going to go into the scientific ins and outs and the big long words and everything else. We're not here for that. We just want to present you with some of the basic facts and ask those awkward questions about NASA, SETI and some people's behaviour. So the evidence so far. The ESA's ExoMars orbiter caught the closest image of the object as it approached Mars. The coma, a hazy cloud thousands of kilometres wide, was visible. Its nucleus, well, it was a bit too small to see, but it's been estimated to be between 0.2 to 3.5 miles in diameter, so it's quite small or it's pretty big. which compared again to Oumuamua, that was only estimated about 100 metres long. So this is considerably larger, and it's really heavy. It's very, very heavy. It's estimated to be about 36 trillion tonnes in weight. Just put that in a bit of perspective for you, that's about 100 times heavier than Mount Everest, or it's 6,000 Great Pyramids of Giza all lumped together. So, gives you an idea, that is heavy, and it's fast. As of early November, its estimated speed is around 152,000 miles per hour. Professor Avi Loeb testifies that 3I Atlas is either a tiny core comet or it belongs to a large population of interstellar objects. His verdict is unusual but not conclusive. Professor Avi Loeb has created a scale. He's called it the Loeb Scale, which is based on another sort of impact meteor scale, but his one is 0 to 10. He's scoring this object as a 4, as Oumuamua was a 4, where Borisov was a 0. It's very obvious that was just a meteor. But should we be looking at maybe pushing it up the scale? Well, join me later in this video when we talk to author Andrew Collins, who has a theory which really could push that up another couple of notches up that scale, I'd say. So the only agency we can rely on, he says loosely, is NASA. And where are they? Since the 1st of October, unfortunately NASA has shut down. They've furloughed over 15,000 employees due to lack of government funding by Congress. So NASA still operates a skeleton crew, focusing on mission critical things. Pretty sure they're looking at this one too. This is pretty critical. But where's the data? Why the silence? And more importantly, why now? In a quiet but seismic shift, the SETI Institute have changed their rules of engagement when it comes to talking to ET. For the first time in 30 years, SETI have updated their alien contact protocol. Again, strange timing. 3I Atlas comes into our solar system, hides behind Mars, NASA goes dark, and it hides behind the Sun. And yet, NASA is still closed, and SETI have updated their rules of engagement. The rules are quite simple really. It's forbidding anybody to communicate back to a signal received from outer space without running that past the UN. You know, UN has just swallowed up most of the planet. I think 193 states have signed up to the UN. There's only literally just over a handful left that haven't. Good luck to you guys. But for some reason, we have to go through the UN now to get permission to send a message back. However, this does not affect CE5 protocols. There's nothing stopping you from making and initiating your own contact and having that dialogue. Not yet anyway. So that either tells me that SETI and NASA and all the other agencies don't really have a lot of faith in CE5 protocols at all anyway, so there's no threat, or they're too worried that if they make it a thing that people will start doing it more. Either way, it's worth considering. So what is exactly happening? Is this just yet another distraction? Are we being prepared for something big? Or is this just a lot of noise over a rock passing by? We'll just have to gather the evidence and make a decision later, I think. There is another theory. Could 3I Atlas be more than just a rock? Could it be a sentient plasma being with consciousness? It's a new angle, and it's something that author Andrew Collins has been discussing, so let's take a look at that. Andrew Collins is a veteran history and science writer with over 40 years of research into ancient mysteries. He's been a leading voice on Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe since their discovery, and is the author of several influential books including From the Ashes of Angels, The Cygnus Key and Karahan Tepe, Civilization of the Anunnaki. In 2008, he rediscovered a vast cave system beneath the Giza Plateau, now known as the Collins Cave. A familiar face on Ancient Aliens, The Unexplained and Gaia TV, Andrew shares with us his thoughts that 3i Atlas could be a sentient being.
Firstly, my own work doesn't just involve, ancient civilizations, ancient mysteries. A lot of it is to try and get to the bottom of what UFOs or UAPs actually are. And this is something I've been doing for, more than 30 years. And that's resulted in books like Alien Energy, Light Quest, Origins of the Gods. And what these say or suggest is that there could be another explanation for them based upon the concept of plasma, which is the full state of matter. You've got, like solids, you've got liquids, you've got gases. And when gases are basically superheated or excited, they turn into plasma, right? And plasma has been known to exude what can only be referred to as sentience or even intelligence since the 1960s, and the work of the American physicist and plasma expert David Bohm. And what he proposed was that some kind of what he called a proto-intelligence could rise up from a deeper level of existence, outside of normal space-time, and inhabit plasma environments during the time that they exist, which can be, a microsecond or a sustained period of time. He felt that they were coming up from something that he referred to as the implicate order, which was basically this realm or void that exists beyond normal space, normal time, and that this is where they dwell. Now that we know that some UFOs at least are almost certainly plasma based, and that they exude sentience and intelligence, then it could well be that this is exactly what's happening, that you're getting intelligences, occupying the spaces that are created when these plasma environments or plasma constructs come into existence. And the thing that really caught my attention was before it went out of sight, on the 24th and 25th of September, is that it was hit by a coronal mass ejection coming from the sun. As soon as I heard this, I just thought, this is very strange. It's almost like the sun has deliberately targeted 3i Atlas, either to push it away in some way, or to give it some kind of energy or power. I mean, that's the impression that came to me. The fact that this CMA did not destroy it in any way. I mean, one report suggests that it brightened quite considerably, but I've only read that in the past couple of days. But it didn't destroy it. It didn't change its trajectory or anything. And it was almost like it was absorbing it into it, as if like it needed this power. It was almost like a electric vehicle, an EV going to a recharging station, but in this case, the recharging station was the sun itself. So I wondered whether there was some kind of sentience going on between these two objects, between 3i Atlas and the sun. Well, this brings in the concept of panpsychism. And panpsychism is the philosophical concept that everything has consciousness, that everything thinks, everything has a form of sentience, even if we don't recognize it. And this extends to stars, to planets, and let's assume perhaps other objects, like comets, for instance. And if so, can we extend this to 3i Atlas? Well, I mean, our sun has been proposed to be sentient. The great free thinker of our times, Rupert Sheldrake, suggested this in a paper. He also suggested that the supermassive black hole at the center of our galaxy could be sentient. So, with these thoughts in mind, I thought, well, let's explore this further. So I did a video on it, which I'm sure you'll link. and also a paper, a research paper, preliminary to try and get all these ideas and facts out, suggesting not just the fact that 3A Atlas could be a sentient being in its own right, and thus one of the reasons why it's acting so strangely and seems to be directed. This is what I would call a directed comet, as opposed to, a random orbital comet. It's almost like it's directed to do certain things when it is within the inner solar system. So, I did this paper, but even since then, new stuff is coming out. The images that's been released of 3A Atlas that was taken by an observatory in the Canary Islands known as the TTT Observatory, and the resulting image basically shows this perfect dark oval with this white coma around it, but at the front of it, it's broken because it's sending forth an antitail towards the direction of the sun. When I looked at this, I thought there looks like there's geometry here. So I checked it out, and the width of the object is basically 3 units of measure, and the length is 4 units of measure. So it's perfect. Now, again, a skeptic might say, well, it's just a coincidence, or, this is an illusion that you've made more out of it than you should have done. But this is just another indication that we're not dealing with something normal. We're dealing with an object that is not properly understood by science. It could be sentient. Obviously, R.V. Loeb from Harvard University, has been warning people and saying, look, don't just see this as an actual object. It could be alien tech. And if it is alien tech, we need to be aware of this. I think that what this is doing, and I think this is probably, dovetails into why you're doing the video, is that I think that there are people in this world who recognize that this is something different. It's not a spaceship coming through, in my opinion. It's an intelligent being that is not bound to the solar system. So it's not a normal comet. In other words, it has a special function in its own right, and one which could relate to its appearance in the solar system. Obviously, R.V. Loeb has already suggested that this might well have been the source of the WOW message from August 1977.
The WOW signal was a powerful narrowband radio burst detected on the 15th of August, 1977 by Ohio State's Big Ear telescope. Astronomer Jerry Ehman famously wrote WOW next to the printout, giving the signal its name. Key facts: duration, 72 seconds, frequency, 1,420.406 megahertzes, the hydrogen line, often considered ideal for interstellar communication. Origin: appeared to come from the constellation Sagittarius. Never repeated, no confirmed source, although some speculate it was a message from an extraterrestrial civilization.
Because he's worked out that 3A Atlas was probably in the same approximate position as where that signal, the WOW signal, was sent from the direction of the constellation of Sagittarius back in 1977. The two dovetail nicely together. Now, we'll never probably be able to prove that, but if he's correct, then that puts things on a whole different level, and that we should be looking for evidence of messages and signals coming from it on the different multiple scans of the frequencies that we're using right now to record its presence in the skies.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the sun's been worshipped, as you know, by ancients for a long time. So the fact that a plasma can have a consciousness and a sentient being is not really new, because the sun has been worshipped, especially within Egyptian mythology, as you know, the ancients before that. So, and of course they say that the Son of God, there's been lots of different interpretations of what they actually mean by the Son of God, rather than being, the child of a man. It could be the actual son. There's been lots of different interpretations of that. So that's a really good, I think, real good, fascinating angle. So, as you know, the Loeb Scale has been put together by Avi Loeb, as you mentioned there. There are characteristics that I think we should be re-evaluating the score. What's your thoughts on the score 4 at the moment? Do you think it should be looked at again?
Well, I mean, the Loeb Scale, which I think is necessary and really important, because astronomers should be looking at these objects more than simply natural, even though they're trying to tell us, oh, don't worry, nothing to see here, it's natural, it's doing a few weird things. But we can explain those weird things quite easily. They can't, actually. They have to sort of virtually jump through hoops to try and explain them. And so I think it's important that the Loeb Scale exists now, and hopefully it will be used by other astronomers in the future. But yes, currently throughout this is at number 4. So is Maya, interestingly enough, which also showed bizarre characteristics. But Borisov is at 0, which means that it showed no strange characteristics, or certainly none that were noted at the time. So, I mean, in the future, we may get objects that increase, or even 3i Atlas itself may increase depending on how weird it gets. Obviously, at the moment, it's behind the sun. It's just about to have its perihelion, its closest approach to the sun. That will take place on the 29th or into the 30th, some suggest, of October, which is interesting from this world perspective, because obviously that's very close to a cross-quarter day, which we call Halloween or Samhain or Samhain. But then what's also interesting is that it will come out from behind the sun, and its closest approach to the Earth will be on December the 19th, which is the solstice. And I think that people should be aware of this. All of it somehow is linked, including the fact that NASA are furloughed at the moment, and have been obviously since the beginning of October, so that their space satellites going around Mars that would have been able to take very close pictures, or certainly much better than we've had before, images of 3i Atlas, they're just still probably sitting in the data files, and nobody's even bothered to look at them yet. I mean, this is quite incredible, but in theory, that's based upon, American politics, not anything to do with extraterrestrial visitors, and yet it's strangely coincidental. But what's even more bizarre is that there were other satellites in the skies that could also have got some good images at that time. We obviously know about those of the European Space Agency, and they have released some images, but it was like, well, we've photographed it. Look, here they are. We don't think what they are. Just have a look at them. That's all they've done. And the Chinese also had their own space telescope up there, as did the UAE, and yet we've heard nothing at all from those. And you'd think that China, through their nationalistic pride, if they could find evidence of extraterrestrial life and be the first nation in the world to announce it globally, you think that they'd want to do that if they had it. And yet they've all gone silent, everyone. The European Space Agency, the UAE Space Agency, the Chinese Space Agency, and of course NASA itself, and any affiliated associations connected with them. Plus, we also know, put the whole idea of comets being dangerous to Earth, they've activated that over the next couple of months, saying that they're doing it as an exercise. In other words, if 3i Atlas comes round out of the perihelion and it's on a different course, or it's broken up and some of those pieces may be directed towards the Earth, then they need to monitor them and do something about it. Well, they've activated that, and they've only done this in the last week. Why? And as we were talking just off of camera before we started, there's this move to actually stop people from responding to extraterrestrial signals if they have received them. This has only gone through in the past month as well, as if like something's going on in the background that we're not being told about here. That's my sense.
No, I totally agree. It's its characteristics are odd, and I think it's activating a few exercises here on Earth which have not been done before, and they all seem to pretend that these are pre-planned and they're just normal. There's nothing normal about this. I mean, the object itself has gained acceleration, because at the end of September it was measured at around 130,000 miles per hour, which is so fast, I mean, it won't be captured by the sun's gravitational force, which is why it's on a hyperbolic trajectory, meaning it will come and go and never come back, so they say. In a kind of way, I'm kind of hoping it won't. In another way, I do.
It won't come back.
No, it probably won't come back.
I mean, obviously, there are some things to do with it which are purely natural, and this is the other thing. It's that astronomers say, well, look, it's doing normal things. It's doing what a comet should do as well. And I don't disagree with this at all. But this is it. I mean, for me, it's what I call a half and half. It's half a natural object and it's half a sentient being. So in other words, if you look at it, you say, oh, it's just a comet. It's doing a few weird things, but that it has sentience. And I think that sentience comes from the activation of the coma around it, which we know was basically there from when it was right out there. I mean, 4 astronomical units, with 1 astronomical unit obviously being the distance between here and the sun. At least 4 out there. It was activating its coma, it was releasing water, it was releasing nickel, cyanide, CO2. Yeah, that's it, carbon dioxide. Yeah. All of these things were coming out really early. And normally a comet would not be outgassing in that way. Okay, let's assume that this is natural. However, why did it need to do that? It's almost like it has a method of creating its coma much earlier than a normal comet, and once that happens, it's like it's reactivating or reanimating its sentience, because the sentience will exist within the coma, which is ionized gas, in other words plasma, and everything that contained within that plasma field, which would be dust, obviously gas. I suppose in many ways you'd call it what's known as a dirty plasma, basically. In other words, it's a plasma that contains dust. And so it's activated. So in other words, this almost seems like it's necessary for this to achieve life, whereas obviously a normal comet would not start outgassing until it was much, much closer to the sun. But it's almost like 3i Atlas has perfected the art of creating its coma, and that seems intentional. That's by design.
Also, you mentioned the CME earlier as well, given that energy, and maybe that's helped fuel its fire. Its predicted trajectory at the moment means that the closest point to us will be, as you mentioned, the 19th of December. But there's still about 1.7 AU, which is roughly around 167 million miles. Yep. So that's its prediction. Should that change, I think then the Loeb Scale needs to be revisited. And I think that will call for a lot of, I wouldn't say panic in the mainstream media, but a lot of discussion will be held at that point. The internet will be ablaze with conspiracy theories and all sorts of hypotheses and, everything else that will go on. And part of this reason why we do this channel is we're trying to cut through that BS that unfortunately is rife on the internet right now and to the facts, but without losing sight of the other possibilities. I think that's where science falls down. They just look at facts and they can't consider that something could have a consciousness, as you've said. So I think that's a really fascinating angle to this story with this, and it is very different from Oumuamua. Oumuamua had, there was a level 4 on the Loeb scale. Its acceleration was fast, but it was a lot slower. It was 67 thousand miles per hour, so it's a lot slower. And Loeb said himself, didn't he, that he thought it was more thin and long rather than the cigar-shaped image that we're all
more like a pancake.
Yeah, he thought it was more like a solar sail, which is why he was being criticised for suggesting that the solar sail was obviously alien technology. The last question I got for you, though, Andrew, is with your knowledge of ancient history that you have, is there anything that springs to mind where they may have documented or forewarned of a visitor of this nature?
Yeah, this is one thing I have really been looking at. Quite clearly, comets have been coming into our skies since, the age of Homo erectus, well, since before that, but let's say Homo erectus, maybe, let's say 500,000, a million years ago, was observing comets. How would they have interpreted them? And I think that initially they would have just seen them as visitors. Now, clearly they wouldn't really know whether it was the same one coming round or a new one or whatever, but they would have looked up the sky and said visitor, basically. And this is the way that it would have gone on. I mean, maybe they saw some connection between, their life, what they were doing, who they were, and the presence in these skies of these objects when they appeared. But then something changed, and I suspect that it probably happened at the beginning of the Younger Dryas period, around 10,800 BC. That from that point onwards, I suspect that our attitude towards comets, if a comet fragment was involved with the mass destruction that seems to have triggered the Younger Dryas event, I think that from that point onwards, we've seen them not only as omens of change, but also as harbingers of doom. Basically, I talk about this in my research paper, that many different cultures around the world, and obviously many still do, when they see comets, they respond to them as that they're going to cause us harm. They could cause catastrophes. Why would you do that when you see a beautiful thing coming into the sky? And I think it's the memory of the fact that a comet was involved, and it was probably Comet Encke, was involved with the triggering of the Younger Dryas event. And I think since that time, it's been seen as associated with catastrophes and cataclysms. So you have to start looking at the different, ancient astronomies, sky law and whatever that seems to deviate from that and says slightly different things. And the area that I'm looking at the moment, I think, is Mayan astronomy. Their attitude towards comets was different to that of the West. Yes, they did see them as portents of change, but they also saw them as cyclic and in many ways determining cycles of time that they were using and activities and events going on down here on Earth. In other words, when a new emperor would be crowned, or how long he was in charge, or her, if it's a female. And, in other words, there is a relationship between the appearance of comets in the skies and what we do down here on Earth, the two are bound together in some way. Now, whether they saw them as sentient or intelligent, I've yet to come across that, but I am absolutely looking into that right now. And if anybody has that type of information, let me know. One thing I will say is that around the time of places like Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe in southeastern Turkey, about 11,000 years ago, I would suggest that comets were seen as the tales of tricksters like the fox or the wolf. And fox imagery is really strong at Göbekli Tepe, and there are pillars that show characters that are wearing what appears to be fox pelts, loincloths. And that's very interesting because in Mayan tradition, when a comet would appear in the sky, and this was witnessed by religious priests, obviously religious priests that were with the earliest Spanish explorers, they witnessed rituals that were going on, that when it came into the sky, that they would go and put their loincloths of fox pelts and I think one other animal as well, and they would do rituals to appease and give offerings to the comet so that it would not affect them in any way or cause catastrophe. So, I think that certain cultures have seen comets as alive, as sentient, as intelligent, and this is something that I definitely am working more on right at this moment.
By now, the exocomet has reached perihelion, the closest approach to the Sun. The ESA's JUICE spacecraft will absorb the object as it moves out of the Sun at a rough distance of 40 million miles away. I hope it's got a good camera. But even then, we're not going to get any data till probably early 2026, if at all really, unless we have some great amateurs out there with some real good telescopes that can see this object. And if you are one of those guys, please let us know. We'd love some of your footage. We have a lot of kit, but nothing like that, so we really appreciate your help. As investigators, we don't close this file until we've got enough evidence to make a decision, because ultimately the evidence will speak for itself. but we'll continue to investigate, so this will remain as an open case, because at the end of the day, you deserve the truth and we demand it. Take care.